We talked the first hour with attorney Jonathan Levy, and no better way to get the truth about the Vatican than to see the inside workings of lawsuits, real live lawsuits, real live people trying to fight this organization. And John, I think, explained it quite well. My guest in this hour is probably one of the preeminent researchers of the Vatican over the years. Eric and I have shared so many hours on the radio, I can't even tell you, and gone this way and that way, discovered most every, talked about so many things about the Vatican that he's brought to the world a lot of information that never would be here. And, kind of reminds me, before I get to Eric, he's waiting here, I just wanted to mention that when I was working as a journalist in Rome, I was sitting with a priest, and we were talking about the Vatican, and he said, Greg, if they understood, the people understood what was in the Vatican Library, they just couldn't handle it. And, I always remembered that, and I always wanted to get inside there, because there are vacuum-sealed vaults in the Vatican Library containing thousands upon thousands of ancient esoteric books from all around the world that have been stolen, hoarded over the years, and kept out of public circulation. The Catholic Church, now what I'm going to say, I know Bible believers may not say, believe that they're the root of the Christian religion, but that's the way the world views them. The Catholic Church, which is the root of the Christian religion, is controlled by a secret society that has, I think, abused occult power to enslave the masses. The end goal is the total enslavement of humanity, which we're seeing right now happening right before our eyes. And all this directly affected each and every one of us right this moment. Humanity has suffered unnecessarily because of denial of the knowledge right there in the Vatican Library vaults. People have been coerced over the centuries into paying for their own damnation to the tune of billions and billions of dollars to keep this lie prospering and continuing strong. The survival and prosperity of this vicious hoax on humanity, and I tell you, the Vatican's right behind it, is because we have a lack of knowledge. And contrary to what most people have been indoctrinated with, Judaism, Christianity, Islam are all relatively new religions. Humanity goes back tens of thousands of years. These three have worked relentlessly to keep us from spiritual and from our spiritual selves and using this power over which all of us have succumbed to. I just wanted to mention that, Eric, because that's how I felt tonight. And bringing you on is always a treat. I haven't talked to you in a long, long time. What have you been doing? And maybe comment on what I just said. Who knows?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Greg, and glad to hear you're doing well. I would agree with you that Romanism, Islam, and Orthodox Judaism is anti-Christ, anti-Bible, and essentially enslaves its followers to a work salvation belief apart from being saved by grace through faith. So I would agree completely with that. And we should also go on to say that Hinduism and Buddhism is the same thing. It's all essentially Mystery Babylon religion, except in different forms for different peoples. So I would agree that man-made religion that really goes back to the idolatry of Babylon is damning to people. It has nothing to do with the true Christ of the Bible, and it enslaves people, evidenced by the military dictators and tribal chiefs and horrible oligarchies ruling the world today for the benefit of the Pope.
So anyway, yeah. And I wanted to just ask you, it's been so long, what have you been working on lately? And I'm going to leave it up to you to get going. You start this interview.
Oh, okay. I just finished up a CD titled 7 Transitions of U.S. Citizenship. And I take it from the original citizenship that we once had from Article 4, Section 2, where it was a subordinate and derivative U.S. citizenship derived from our paramount and dominant state citizenship for white people. And I take it to then the 14th Amendment that was declared ratified on July 28, 1868. That's the first transition. And the second transition is the Supreme Court decisions in the slaughterhouse cases, where it said that the new privileges and immunities of this new 14th Amendment did not include fundamental rights, which are later described as the Bill of Rights in Maxwell versus Dow in 1899. And then from there, I take it to the creation of the birth certificate in about 1906 here in Pennsylvania, which really created an artificial person, an artificial martial persona. And then in 1933 with the fourth transition with FDR's Emergency Powers Declaration of March 6, that really drafted all these martial persons ready for war, and they became securities for the national debt that would be used to refinance the new emergency powers government. So of March 6, 1933, we've been under emergency powers ever since. And then we have the slaughterhouse cases and the Erie Railroad decision and the U.S. versus Carolina Products decision handed down on April 25th, 1938, which effectively did away with all common law rights and common law procedure, did away with the Lochner era, that the Supreme Court championed individual common law right to work, and therefore you couldn't tax it. And so in 1939, you have the First Internal Revenue Code that comes out for everybody. And then in 1950, on December 16th, you have Dirty Harry Truman's Emergency War Powers Act due to the Korean fiasco. And we've been under those two emergency powers executive orders ever since. And so then I show that all the federal courts now are essentially, even though they're Article III courts, are emergency powers courts, emergency war powers courts. And as they prosecute in the all capital letters name, they're using that fiction that is attached to the natural person to bring the natural person under its jurisdiction. So I'll be testing this in federal court next Monday in Missouri because we have this issue that I will be helping a gentleman with. So it was kind of timely that I went through those 7 transitions because now we'll be able to test it. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So you're going to you're testing the jurisdiction based on that's not the man he really is, correct?
That's correct. And see, we know from the previous decisions of these federal judges that they just proceed anyway, but not ever, to my knowledge, has a defendant brought the release into evidence. And a release is filed on a state level. It's a unilateral contract under seal. The four indicia for a release has to be in writing, it has to be signed, it has to be sealed, it has to be delivered to a third party. And when that happens, then by operation of law, it's a contract, and you thereby release the state of its obligations that it once had when the release was in effect. And so therefore you're no longer surety for this artificial person. So therefore you can say in court that I am not this person, I am not this all caps entity, this usufruct, this martial Roman persona, because that's exactly what it is, it's Roman, and nor am I surety for this martial Roman persona. And so I'll be very intrigued as to how the judge proceeds. I maintain he's going to deny the motion because the motion is motion to dismiss for lack of impersonum jurisdiction. And right. I maintain he will not grant the motion, and so we're going to introduce every piece of evidence in the motion separately in court for the jury's benefit. So the jury can see that this court is substantively a martial court with a gold-fringed martial flag, war powers flag, military flag, flying in the courtroom, and that the one indicted is this martial persona, this nom de guerre, this name of war in all capital letters.
I know a similar case like this in England worked. I was talking to somebody over there, and that was maybe a year ago. So, I'd like to see what happens.
I'll report on it because it'll be not tomorrow, but the following Monday will be probably voir diring the jury, and then Tuesday will be the court procedure, and I imagine 3 the jury will give us decision.
Yeah, interesting. So, let me know on that. And, going back to what you said about the 7 steps of citizenship, we've digressed, I think, from basically, to make it simple, a free man to a corporate slave, more or less.
That's right. Even after the 14th Amendment, when the blacks were given citizenship, actually, the 14th Amendment created a whole new citizenship. It reversed the origin and character of American citizenship, of Washington's republic. It made U.S. citizenship paramount and dominant. It made state citizenship subordinate and derivative. And so therefore, with a new citizenship, we really had a new republic. It's a new republic, and that's why there were newspapers out called the New Republic, and in Lancaster, not far from where I'm at, they called it the New Era, the Lancaster New Era. And the New Era really began after the 1868 14th Amendment. And so with this new status, we have a new country. And when this new country, this new republic, a national republic, the citizens were still considered to be American freemen, even though they were black and white and also Asian at the time. They were still considered American freemen. The term American freeman ceases to exist in the law after FDR's executive order of March 6, 1933. That's when everybody becomes a subject. They essentially become surety for this artificial person, and they are intimately bound with this artificial person because now this artificial person, as it is recorded in a birth certificate, the birth certificate becomes a security. It was securitized, and it was given a monetary value, and the reason why it could be given a monetary value is because the surety was an actual living person whose life in labor was measured by a monetary value. So that's what the wicked sinners did when they declared bankruptcy, took all the gold and refinanced with HGR 192 and put all these paper instruments into circulation as collateral for the national debt created by the Pope, national debt that was a result of the Pope's Federal Reserve Bank extending credit to the Congress to build its war machine, to wage war on the nations around the world to restore the Pope's temporal power.
Right, and no one can do this better than you. When you try to bring this link together and drawing the Vatican into the mix here and saying, outright, how can you prove the Vatican controls our government? Give us some examples, both, factually and also some of the symbols you see around.
Okay, well, if you would simply be just pedestrian, we could go to the Al Smith dinner that's held usually every year and specifically every election year. And when you go to the Al Smith dinner in New York City, it's held in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, which is probably the finest hotel in New York City. And there at the Al Smith dinner, you will see the Archbishop of New York City, who now is Timothy Cardinal Dolan. And at the recent Al Smith dinner, it was just a couple months ago before the quote-unquote election, you had Barry Davis Obama to his right, you had Mitt Romney to his left, and then you had Obama to his left, you had Mitt Romney to his right, and then on the left of Obama you have a guy by the name of Christopher Quick. Christopher Quick is one of the foremost men in the Bank of America, which according to Avro Manhattan, all the stocks are 51% owned by the Jesuit order. Christopher Quick is also a very powerful Knight of Malta. So we see this Knight of Malta to the left hand of Barry Davis Obama, and then there's a few others there. There's a bishop there, and then of course you have that papal court Jew, Charles Schumer, senator from New York. So all these people of power at the Pope's white power structure there at the Al Smith dinner, you see them. They're military generals, they're statesmen, they're bankers, and they're all kissing the ring of the Archbishop of New York City. So that's just one piece of evidence right there. If you want to go to another piece of evidence, we want to just go to the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. Council on Foreign Relations in New York has such notables as Knight of Malta John de Goya. John de Goya is a Knight of Malta, trained by Jesuits for many years at Georgetown University, and he's now the president of Georgetown University. You have a former CFR member who was Cardinal Bernardin of Chicago. You have all these significant papal hierarchical individuals, and I maintain that Timothy Cardinal Dolan oversees the Council of Foreign Relations in New York City from St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is across the street from Rockefeller Center, which is completely manned by the Central Intelligence Agency as it oversees life and time and much of the media today in the country.
I interviewed once a New York police detective named Jim Rothstein, And he was working very hard to tie the connections between the Vatican and all the child trafficking in New York going on during the time. And his investigations led right to the door of St. Patrick's and the Archbishop of New York. And he once mentioned to me that he felt after his investigations and the people he talked to, also investigating a lot of the Kennedy assassination, that the Archbishop of New York was the most powerful man in our country. Now, a lot of people would shake their head and say, Greg, what are you talking about? Explain why he may be right.
Well, we have to remember that every archbishop and cardinal, particularly a cardinal, is considered to be a prince of the church. Prince is a temporal title. That means he governs cities. He governs peoples. An archdiocese is a geographic breakdown of the area that he governs. And so, for example, I know for a fact that the Archbishop of San Francisco controls the entire San Francisco PD. They govern the local PD. They govern the local banking that goes on. If it's in a city where there's a Federal Reserve Bank, they oversee the Federal Reserve Bank, be it in St. Louis, be it in New York, be it in Boston, be it in Chicago, be it in Los Angeles. I mean, all these cities where you have the Federal Reserve Bank, they all have an archbishop there, except maybe Atlanta, Georgia. So they're governing the banks, they're governing the politics, they're governing the military. I have a picture of Theodore Hesburgh, who is reviewing the cadets at West Point. I mean, what's going on here? Well, Theodore Hesburgh was one of the most powerful Jesuits who ever lived in this country. He was the one who was founded the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. He was also an acting president of Georgetown for a while. He oversaw Douglas MacArthur at the war trials in Tokyo in 1948, which excused Hirohito from being put on trial, and they let him go. So, I mean, it's obvious once you begin to connect these dots with all these individuals that one leads to the next, to the next, and to the next, and there's no denial, if you were going to read the historical works like Chiniquy, 50 years in the Church of Rome, that the Jesuits are in control of every major commercial city in this empire.
Right, and Chiniquy discussed the murder of Lincoln and how the Jesuits were involved in that. And it was interesting to me during that, maybe it was like 3 or 4 years ago, when there was a lot of heated debate, at least on the alternative media, with some really interesting people, like the gentleman, his name escapes me right now, who's been on my show many times, who wrote a book about this. And when this theory started to come out, I noticed a lot of shows coming on the History Channel kind of giving you a different story. Then a couple of movies about Lincoln. They've even made a movie in Hollywood about Lincoln the Vampire Killer. Have you heard about that one?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So tell me why you think they did that.
Well, I think it's just they're doing damage control. It's like they had that lying Roman Catholic Bill O'Reilly write a book on the Kennedy assassination, or the Lincoln assassination. I mean, he'll never connect it to the Jesuits.
I didn't know that.
Yes, sir. It was very recently.
What the heck does Bill O'Reilly know about?
Bill O'Reilly knows everything. Don't you know that, Greg?
Yeah.
He's our father figure on Fox News. Whatever he says is always good for the folks. I maintain not the spin stops here, but the truth stops here.
So anyway, tying the Jesuits, the Knight of Malta, and the Vatican together with our politicians and exactly how this kind of works, so for people to understand it. Okay,
well, we have, if you go back to the Kennedy assassination, you find significant Knights of Malta, all of them being involved. You have men like Henry Luce, who was a Knight of Malta. He was the founder of Time Life. He purchased a Zapruder film for $150,000 and locked it up until Jim Garrison subpoenaed it in 1966 or so. So that Knight of Malta was very much involved in the suppression of evidence of the CIA, Secret Service, FBI assassination of Kennedy in 1963. You also have another Knight of Malta by the name of James Jesus Angleton. It's just coming out in some of the other regular news now that Angleton had a hand in the Kennedy assassination. I said it 10, 12 years ago. Absolutely. Angleton oversaw it. He was head of counterintelligence. He had been trained by other Knights of Malta like Kim Philby of British Secret Intelligence Service. He was also working with William Casey, who was a graduate from Jesuit Fordham University and later went on to be the head of the CIA, Casey being a Knight of Malta. Casey, who was the head of the Import-Export Bank during the Nixon administration, he's the one that extended all this money to the Russian communists to build the Kama River truck factory where they could build all these tanks for our future invasion. So another Knight of Malta is you have Lee Iacocca. Lee Iacocca oversaw the taking of the limousine to Cincinnati to a Ford dealer where they could remove all the primary strikes. Lee Iacocca oversaw all of that, and he still lives. And he ought to be indicted by the Justice Department, but because the Jesuits run the Justice Department out of Georgetown, he will never be touched. He's untouchable. And you have Cartha Dickey DeLoach, who was the third in command of the FBI. He's a Knight of Malta. I maintain he was really the one in command of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover was just a token homosexual with his homosexual boyfriend, Clyde Tolson. The real head was the responsible Cardinal Cartha D. DeLoach, and he met with Jesuit Daniel Power at Georgetown University along with another Knight of Malta, James Rowley. He was the head of the Secret Service at the time. His brother Francis Rowley was a Jesuit priest. So they met at Georgetown after the Kennedy assassination so that the FBI and the Secret Service could work together better. You have another powerful Knight of Malta in charge of counterintelligence for a while. What is his name? He is featured he's the bad guy in that movie, The Good Shepherd. He's the one who beats up that Russian defector, who is really Yuri. What's his name? Yuri. Not Victor Belenko, but anyway, the guy that's just beating him up. He's a Knight of Malta. He's in charge of counterintelligence. So you have all these significant Knights of Malta. Then you have William F. Buckley. He contributed to the cover-up. So these Knights of Malta are all in critical places. And today it's the same story. You got the Knights of Malta in critical places in, for example, the Bank of America, as I mentioned, Christopher Quick. You have the head of Verizon. He's a Knight of Malta. It goes on in big business. So it's these kind of men that need to be followed.
I know, and you're coming off the top of your head here, but you can go to Eric's website. Give him your website, and you've got a lot of information there about that. So do that. Yeah, my website is VaticanAssassins.org, and you can go there and. Yeah, and you can get a lot more in-depth information if you're listening on what Eric's talking about. But the point is, what's their oath? They take an oath, don't they? Yeah, the Knights of Malta take an oath to their loyalty. Their first loyalty is to the Pope of Rome. And so any of these knighthoods, these papal knighthoods, are all treasonous because their first and foremost allegiance is to a foreign sovereign. Remember, the Pope's not just a religious leader. He's a political leader. In the law, he is a sovereign. He cannot be sued. In the law, he's the king of Rome. He's the king. And he commands an empire, and he has a center city, Vatican City. Yeah, it's like 125 people live there or something. But he commands a lot more than that around the world, as we know. Yes, probably the richest organization in the world, as we know. No doubt. And anyway, listen, Eric, we're going to go into come back. All right, we are back for the second half hour of the last hour of the Investigative Journal. You can catch me here every Sunday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. My guest tonight is Eric John Phelps. He has a website called VaticanAssassins.org, and over the years, going back way back, I think he's brought much information to the public regarding the secret workings of the Vatican Jesuit order, along with our politicians hand and fist working together with them. One of the things that I've always talked about is that America seems to be a warlike people. We are always involved in wars. I don't think that there's ever been a time in our history since the beginning that we haven't been fighting somebody somewhere. Usually we say it's for freedom. I come to think it's for oil and money and wealth for a certain select few. And you can either think that wars are orchestrated or that they're coincidental. I happen to think they're orchestrated, and I happen to think the Vatican's involved in it. Eric, you know quite well how they are. Bring some of the wars that we've been involved with together with the Vatican's involvement along with our government.
Sure. I maintain that every war since the war between the states has been a Vatican-controlled war on both sides, and that we have lost every one of them. The loss of the historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant peoples of the Confederate South was done by betrayal through Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, Judah Benjamin, all working for the Jesuit papacy, as well as the radical Red Republicans in the North, Stanton and Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, and a host of others. Lincoln was he realized what he was involved in and tried to back out and not go along with the 14th Amendment, so they killed him for it, for a few other reasons. But both sides were working together for the annihilation of the historic Protestant South, so that on the ruins they could create a new nation with a new citizenship, and this new nation, 14th Amendment America, would be the foundation for what I call in my book the Pope's Holy Roman 14th Amendment, corporate fascist, socialist, communist American empire. And it's this empire after 1865 that they begin to build in dead earnest, because they're going to wage war against the American Indians for 25 years. And the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 is the first great oppression of the American Indians, and the one who signed the treaty was the Roman Catholic General of the Army, Philip Sheridan. And he was overseen by his most devoted advisor, Jesuit Pierre de Smet, who was the most powerful Jesuit probably west of the Mississippi. So after that, you have the Spanish-American War, where the Jesuits fomented that, blowing up the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, and then justifying an American war on Spain, because the Jesuits were busy breaking up the Spanish Empire, because the Spanish Empire was beginning to resist the Jesuit order, and it had also aided the Americans during their War of Independence. So every empire that was involved in aiding Americans setting up the country had to suffer. That's why the Jesuits broke up the French Empire shortly thereafter, and then they broke up the Spanish Empire. Then you have after that, you have as a result of the Spanish-American War, out of the treaty, we have a treaty that protects every piece of Roman Catholic Church property in this country, because at the time of the Lincoln assassination, after he was murdered by the Jesuits, overseen by Bernardine F. Wiggett, that Jesuit, that the government threatened to confiscate every piece of Roman Catholic property in America. So with the treaty, as a result of the Spanish-American War, that could never happen. Very clever. Well, the Jesuits assassinate McKinley, and they put dirty Theodore Rex Roosevelt in office. And Rex Roosevelt is really the first American emperor acting out his part as the emperor of an empire. And the empire then begins to establish everything that an empire has. It has a central bank. So the Federal Reserve Bank was set up in 1913. It has a heavy progressive socialist communist graduated income tax, which is the Pope's war tax. They put that upon us in 1913 with the 16th Amendment. And then you have the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank, in 1913 on December 23rd, thanks to Woodrow Wilson, and that supposed champion of silver, Williams Jennings Bryant. They both worked together. So we have the Federal Reserve Bank in place to extend credit to the war machine being built in the U.S., and you also have the income tax, which is the war tax, to be able to finance it. You have the beginning of U.S. Steel under J. Pierpont Morgan, who's first head of U.S. Steel is the Knight of Malta, and this U.S. Steel company is going to be building all the steel destroyers and ships for World War I in Hog Alley in New Jersey. So they're going to build this huge empire with its military-industrial complex, with a monopoly on steel, a monopoly on petroleum, a monopoly on auto manufacturing, All of this being controlled by the Knights of Malta so they can use America in its manpower and all of its goods and services to be used together in wars to restore the Pope's temporal power. This is what I call the Second 30 Years' War from 1914 to 1945, World War I and everything in between, all financed by the American Empire and the British Empire at the time. So that's World War I, World War II, Second 30 Years' War. After that, we have the Vietnam War.
World War II for a minute, because I think it's interesting. There's a lot of information out that Western banks funded Hitler, things like that. But give us some of the real nuts and bolts of how the Vatican was involved with Hitler, as well as the downfall of Japan. I always was curious, well, how did Japan get involved in this?
Well, Japan was... We'll talk with Japan first, okay? Japan was involved because... Japan had expelled the Jesuits for over 200 years. Praise be to God for that. The Jesuits had sought... The Japanese emperor was very nice to them, and the shogun were very nice to the Jesuits, and they welcomed them in their country, till they learned the Jesuits were after a political power. And so, as a result, the shogun, on order of his emperor, expelled the Jesuits in about 1614. The Christian ban, quote-unquote, takes place in like around 1630-something. But the Jesuits were really kicked out in 1614. And for 200 years, for over 200 years, they're expelled from Japan until they are formally readmitted, according to my sources, in 1865. But we have to remember that the Emperor Komi at the time, he was a very young emperor. He was 36 years of age. And he utterly refused to allow the white Western Protestant nations back into Japan, all of them except the Dutch, because the Dutch kept his emperor, kept the Tokugawa shogunate in power along with the emperor when the Jesuits sought to overthrow it with the Spanish. And but he would not allow Britain in because he knew the British crown was controlled by the Pope. He would not allow America in because he knew America was being controlled by the papacy at the time. It was on the verge of it and being controlled by it. And so he didn't want to let any of these white Western Protestant men in because that was a threat to his sovereign power of ruling his country. Well, the Jesuits used James Buchanan to send Commodore Perry over to Japan in 1853 and with his gunboats open up Japan for the West. And as a result of that, Emperor Komi still didn't want this. He wanted the white man of the West out. And so in 1867 or so, right about there, he was poisoned. He was given the poison cup. And the one who succeeded him was Emperor Meiji when he was like 14 years of age, and he will reign over Japan for the next 40 years. Emperor Meiji then centralizes power in Tokyo. Emperor Meiji is involved in bringing in American machine Gatling guns. And if you see the movie with Tom Cruise in it, That Night of Malta, it's called The Last Shogun. It shows the destruction of the samurai in 1877, which is exactly what happened. And then from there on, the Jesuits centralized power in Tokyo, and they begin to build their Japanese imperial empire for the purpose of killing out all Protestant missionaries in the Far East, which is what they did. And then if they would also consolidate all the gold into their hands, as we read in the Gold Warriors, where they would have somewhat 125 treasure troves in the Philippines of all the gold that the Japanese Imperial Army gathered up all over the Far East. And that gold would then be sent to New York banks and then ultimately controlled by the papacy. So Japan was fascist. Emperor Hirohito wore a swastika when he was in London. And so the Jesuits will use Japan under this fascist ideology of Japanese racial supremacy over all Asian nations, just as they will use Germany with their Nazi ideology of white German supremacy over all of white nations. And so using these as two oppressive, aggressive Axis powers to kill off designated populations and gather in all the gold and art treasures they possibly can for the benefit of the papacy. Meanwhile, we have Washington and London financing it. You got FDR, Churchill, and Hitler, and Hirohito, and Stalin all working together, and I prove this in my chapter 37, which is about 150 pages in my book.
And the bombing of Japan, what was that all about? The places they chose to bomb.
Well, remember Curtis LeMay was the general who oversaw that, and of course he was a good Freemason working for the Pope. And the bombing of Japan, they firebombed much of Japan. They firebombed Tokyo. They firebombed all the major cities, so that they could destroy historic, ancient Japanese culture. And on the ruins of destroying ancient Japanese culture and the Japanese manhood that Emperor Hirohito participated in, betraying his people, they could then rebuild Japan into a commercial satellite of 14th Amendment American Empire belonging to the Pope. And they would build Japan into a huge and prosperous commercial satellite until the time would come when they would hand over Japan to Red China and make it a commercial asset when the Vatican is busy building the unification of the kings of the East, of the Oriental nations in the East, to be led by China.
Yeah, interesting, because that's exactly what happened to Japan.
That's right. That's right.
Hey,
so that's what happened in Japan. And in Germany, it was a similar thing.
We've talked for many hours about the Vatican connection to Hitler, so let's pass on that right now and move to what's going on, what happened. Let's move to Iraq, Iran. Let's talk about the Iraqi war and how that's leading into bigger things.
Okay, well, we know, first of all, that 9/11 was an inside job of the American intelligence community, overseen by the Archbishop of New York, Edward Cardinal Egan at the time, who was the master of Knight of Malta, George J. Tenet, who was the DCI at the time and also on the National Security Council. So it was an inside job in order to do two things: to put the U.S. ultimately under martial law by way of the Department of Homeland Security, created by the Jesuit coadjutor and Knight of Malta, John C. Gannon. He was the ultimate designer of it, and he was in the CIA for 23 years. And then you have the other reason was to wage the 12th Crusade against Islam, and particularly the Shia of Iraq.
If I could mention one thing, then you continue. Okay. But one little known fact that always gets forgotten here is that the Patriot Act, we all know about that, was written prior to 9/11, and it was written in Georgetown University by a lawyer there.
By Bien Dinh, who was related to the Roman Catholic Dinh dynasty that had governed Vietnam during the Vietnam War.
Interesting. Go ahead.
Okay. So we now have this crusade, first in Afghanistan, where there is a Shia population. Then it went into Iraq. And by the way, the invasion of Afghanistan was in 2001 on October 7th. The listeners need to remember that day, October 7th, because that's the same day that the papacy, with the Knights of Malta, fought the notorious Battle of Lepanto and defeated the Muslim Navy, opening up the Middle East for quote-unquote missionaries and those that would be going there to the Holy Land. But this Battle of Lepanto was a victory of the Knights of Malta and the papacy over the Muslims. And so on this very day of October 7th, they're going to start this crusade and enter in, led by Tommy Franks, into Afghanistan on October 7th of 2001. On December 13th, bin Laden is murdered of 2001, so he doesn't exist. So he's a paper tiger, a false enemy. And then in 2003, Iraq is invaded. And if you want to see a tremendous video on it, you must see the documentary No End in Sight. No End in Sight. In that documentary, it proves that L. Paul Bremer was the one who created the insurgency. L. Paul Bremer, according to my connections in Italy, is a Knight of Malta and a Jesuit brother. And L. Paul Bremer was the one who did away with the Iraqi military, driving all the ex-Iraqi military into becoming the insurgency. 4 days after L. Paul Bremer abolishes it, we have the first IED going off.
Mm-hmm.
So, for all the American soldiers listening, you want to remember that L. Paul Bremer is a traitor, and he was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom Award along with that other traitor, George J. Tenet, along with that other traitor, Tommy Franks, by that other traitor, George W. Bush. So now they have their 12th crusade against Islam, and Islam never touched us. They never did anything to us on 9/11. Over 1 million Iraqis have been murdered. Because if there's no cause for war and you're warring against the population, it's murder. And every American soldier that's been hurt or killed has died in vain, died because he's been deceived by a lying government who calls all the American soldiers their heroes by way of Fox News and other entities. So this is what this is really about. And the end game is to rebuild Babylon for the benefit of the papacy, because the final Pope of Rome is going to be murdered. He's going to rise from the dead to be the Antichrist, the man-beast of Daniel 7:11 and Revelation 13:3-10, the Antichrist of 1 John 2:18 and 1 John 4:3, and he will be the one that will be called the King of Babylon of Isaiah 13, the Assyrian, and he will be the ruler of the world, implementing his mark, his number, or his name for world commerce. All of this has to take place in a rebuilt Babylon, according to Jeremiah 50 and 51 and Revelation 18, because Babylon must be destroyed by fire, and the ancient Babylon was never destroyed by fire. So it has to be rebuilt, the center of world commerce and world politics, of the capital of the beast, and then destroyed by fire by the Lord. So,
we're still mired in Afghanistan and the Middle East there. How do you... we don't have a crystal ball, but how do you foresee this playing out with Iran and Israel?
Well, the U.S. government here, run by the Pope, already has Iran surrounded. You got U.S. troops in Afghanistan, Pakistan, you got U.S. troops in Iraq. Don't tell me they've left. There's 14 American bases in Iraq, and there's no way the Americans are out of there. And you got a huge group of mercenaries in there. So, and then you have 4 carrier groups in the Persian Gulf and the general vicinity. And then you have another one, the Charles de Gaulle, you have a 5th carrier there, I believe. So you have this huge armada to the south of Iran. You have, and they're protecting, by the way, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, because Abu Dhabi and Dubai are the treasure cities of the Knights of Malta now. And so they are preparing for war on Iran, because Iran is the capital of Shia Islam. And this war is primarily against the Shia to annihilate them. Tehran does not have one Sunni mosque in it. Tehran has 20,000 Jews living in it. And so they're going to kill the Jews of Tehran, destroy the Sunni mosques of Iran, or the Shia mosques of Tehran, just as they destroyed many of the Shia mosques in Iraq.
Why the Shia? People don't understand.
Because the Shia were was an offshoot of Islam after Muhammad died. And the Shia followed the Ali. And so the Sunni Muslims consider the Shias infidels, and that is why the Shia are not allowed to take pilgrimages to Mecca or Medina. So the Shia have to be annihilated, because remember, the Vatican created Sunni Islam, the Vatican did not create Shia Islam. So the Vatican, with its Sunni wealth running Kuwait, Arabia, UAE, are using the treasures there to finance the American crusade there against the Shia. And once the Shia are neutralized, then all of the Sunni Islam can be united against the West. And I maintain that unification will happen when Mecca, Medina, and the mosques in Jerusalem will be destroyed, and that will all be blamed on U.S. forces, and that will unite every Sunni Muslim to unite against the Americans, to kill every American they can find worldwide.
And I wondered, what about Israel here? How do you see that playing out?
There will be a war in Israel, and one of my sources says they're going to be bombing Tel Aviv, and of course there will be war in Jerusalem, because the mosques have to come down. But after this war, Israel will become very wealthy, it will become very prosperous, it will become much more powerful, because you see, Israel is, in the eyes of the Pope, his revived Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, which was destroyed in 1291 when the Mamluks drove out all the Templars. So it's now the revived Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, and the Pope must have this so he can rebuild Solomon's temple pursuant to the wishes of the Templars, or the Freemasons, or the Jesuits, really, who are the revived Knights Templars. Solomon's Temple must be built. You cannot build Solomon's Temple if it's controlled by Muslims. That's why the Jesuits controlling the British during World War I destroyed the Ottoman Empire in 1924 and divided up the empire into various states like Iraq and Syria and Jordan and Palestine and so on. Because there has to be a Jerusalem inhabited by Jews so that the temple can be built. If there's no Jews, if it's under Muslim control, the temple will never be built.
It's so hard to put a time frame on all this, but is it in the foreseeable future?
I believe the bringing down of the mosques is in the foreseeable future. And I believe that we could very well see the rebuilding of the Hebrew temple within the next 20 years. We will see the U.S. go down, I'm sure. We will lose this ultimate war with the Russians and the Chinese, and then we'll be partitioned, as was Germany. And then we'll have Europe being a superpower. We'll have the Far East being a superpower under China, the kings of the East. We'll have Africa united under one king, the king of the South. We'll have that general, and then we'll have Israel becoming very powerful, because Daniel talks about the power of the holy people. So that will be the setting for what's coming as far as the 70th week of Daniel, which is yet future, and of course the time of Jacob's trouble, or the Great Tribulation, when the Antichrist rules the world for 42 months.
So America is serving this Pope's purpose right now, being the military might he needs to go into the Middle East. The end game for us, 50 years down the road, is America like we've never seen before. I can't even quite imagine it. How have you imagined it?
Well, it'll be an America that is no longer America. It will have been invaded. That's why the government in Washington's building China, giving all our secret technology. They have a huge new aircraft carrier now that's beautiful. And they have all of our special flight technology. They've given everything to Red China, and it's just one thing after another. And so we've built our enemies. We've built our invaders. We've built Soviet Russia. We've given them all of our technology. We've built Red China. We've given trillions to Arabia and Kuwait and Dubai and United Arab Emirates for the rebuilding of the next caliphate there that will be the Pope's revived Babylon. America is arming the nations of the world, the governments of the world, to oppress their peoples, while at the same time to create these power centers as prophesied in Scripture. And when America's done being used for that, then it will be scuttled, invaded, and occupied.
Distributed amongst the powers that they built, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Where does that leave the 50 states? Is it going to be no more?
No more.
No more Montana. Huh?
No more Montana. It'll be that Montana will be under China. China's getting everything to the Mississippi River. China will be taking all of the Canadian Protestant provinces up to Ontario, and I maintain the EU will be taking the Maritimes, New Brunswick, and Quebec, as well as Maine and the New England.
What about east of the Mississippi?
East of the Mississippi, the South will be going under Chinese and Muslim invaders. Russia will get Alaska. And some in northern Canada. It's going to be all partitioned between the Russians, the Chinese, the Muslims. And if it's not just the Chinese, it'll be the Japanese will be with them, the Koreans will be with them. Remember, the Japanese are having a minor city built for them in Idaho that's, 50 square miles?
Oh, that's right. I heard about that, yeah.
Yeah. So it's the giving away of America is already in the process. It's one big fire sale.
Exactly. What about the American people 50 years from now? What will they be doing? Working for these people? Living as slaves? What?
Well, at least one half of the American people are going to die. In concentration camps and foreign invasion and foreign wars, at least that. Okay. But it's not pretty for what's coming for us.
Not a happy picture. Listen, Eric, we're all out of time. And thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. We'll have you on again. And again, you can listen to Eric. What time are you on now?
I'm on...